Welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm José.
I'm Mike.
And today we're going to talk about Hereditary, which...
Hereditary.
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 You say potato and I say potato. Or the other way around.
Potato is wrong. Horror movie.
Yes.
A first-time director. Written and directed by Ari Aster.
Yes, it's been getting very good reviews. It's proving a hit. It had a budget of 10 million and it made almost that or over that in its first week.
It's made 5 times that by now.
Right.
Or more.
I didn't like it. What about you?
I had trouble with it. Let's give it there's a lot of spoiler kind of potential, so let's give a précis of it without that, which is there's a family. Toni Collette's the mother, Gabriel Byrne's the father. The son and daughter are Alex Wolff and Millie Shapiro. The mother's an artist. The dad, you don't know what his job is, and the kids are just school kids. The grandmother's died. Toni Collette's character's mother, it's tough to say anything without kind of getting into too many details, really. But there's grief in their life, and they can't really communicate with each other very well, and some unfortunate kind of events occur, and things start to spiral out of control. That's incredibly vague, but that's really all you can say.
We just have to go into spoiler territory. If you haven't seen the film, don't listen to the podcast.
Yeah, so like that's
because otherwise nothing makes sense.
Yeah, from now on, there's going to be a lot of spoilers, because kind of plot revelations is they are the sort of thing of the day.
Yes. I mean, I must say, I didn't like the film on many levels, not just, the story. Though it struck me as being... So for the first little bit, I was thinking, oh, how interesting. Here it is about a mother who it's revealed, they don't want to have children, who, hated her mother and kind of tried to keep away from her as much as possible, and then ended up being lumbered with her, and how brave for her to say that really she didn't want any children and she had them in spite of herself. She doesn't know how she ended up having them and so on. So kind of each of those revelations, I thought, well, how interesting, right? Kind of you rarely hear that in cinema. And then as the film progressed, I actually ended up feeling that it was misogynistic.
The film certainly loses interest in that, I think. But how do you think it's misogynistic?
Well, because kind of everything is blamed on the women, really. So, kind of the grandmother is the source of evil. This other woman who it turns out was, great friends with the mother, ends up being the person who entraps the family. The Toni Collette character is shown to be kind of, a very bad mother, really, and one who refuses to take blame for part of her actions and so on and so forth. And then I don't like what they do to her at the end. So that last image of her stabbing herself.
She's using a piano wire to cut her head off, rather.
Yes. So I thought it was all kind of like very brutal against women in all ways, really. Kind of it blames them for everything and then it kills them all, pretty much. Right? So...
The men don't get off scot-free.
Well, actually, I think the men are very nice, in a way. So the son is very nice, and then the father is a complete innocent. And then, of course, it turns out, that at the end of the film, one of the kings of hell, returned to Earth, ends up inhabiting the boy's body. Right.
The father is brutally killed from out of nowhere, in a way that he really doesn't deserve.
Yeah, but he's very nice throughout, and kind of protecting his children and so on and so forth.
Maybe you could also see it as he's slightly uncaring towards his wife. When he's been shown, he basically considers that she's having a breakdown, and despite the fact that he's been shown very clear evidence that something supernatural is actually happening, he still kind of refuses to believe it, refuses to sympathise. I
don't agree. I think it's a process, right? So he's very supportive, and then the film makes you understand why, he ends up not being supportive any further, really. And that really begins to be when in his eyes, she begins endangering the children. Which she does. And what did you make of that bit, for example, when she threw the book and he ended up? Because, for a while I thought that is conscious, like he's tricking him into giving up his life.
That was nonsensical to me. And this is one of the places where I had trouble with the film, because what the film does is a sort of bait and switch. It starts off as, and for a good hour, it's a family drama.
Yes.
Really, it's a family that has been broken up by the death of the daughter, and it's partially the son's fault, partially the mother's fault, although it was an accident. And they're kind of unable to talk about it, and they're trying to, and they already could kind of never really communicated anyway, for the reasons you were saying, she didn't want to have kids and so on. And they kind of gather around the dinner table, and these kind of scenes explode. And I think some of the dialogue in those scenes is fantastic. It really they feel like real kind of family disagreements. They feel really authentic. So I was really getting on with it. And then as the film sort of explodes into kind of full-on occult sort of insanity, it started to lose me. And there is an element of that which is being used to this sort of film. It's not a type of film that I've ever really been accustomed to. Even ones that I like Kill List, for instance. But as it gets more and more into the occult stuff, it starts to lose me. It's just not something I really sympathise with. And so the problem that I had with that scene in particular, where the dad is immolated, is that you've previously seen that setting the book on fire will set the mother on fire. The fire creeps up her arm as she tries to set it on fire. And so that link is established.
Yes.
So it totally switches it on you, and
it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense, and maybe there is like some kind of like in movie Bible of like this is how everything works, that explains why the dad dies the second time rather than the mum, but it doesn't make sense to me. And the shock of the dad being set on fire, and it's kind of an interesting image, is not enough to satisfy the fact that it doesn't really make any sense.
Yes.
But I don't know if I'm being unfair asking it to make so much sense in a logical way, because I think part of the project of the film is to go off the rails.
Well, it does, but I don't think it does so in a very satisfactory way, and I don't like the switches that it pulls. So for the first hour or so, you think, oh, how interesting, right? The film is called Hereditary. Here's a grandmother, and then there's a daughter, and and then there's a granddaughter, right? And maybe it's something that bypasses a generation, because you see the grandmother appearing to the daughter, and then the daughter does odd things like cut the head of a pigeon and things like that, right? And then the film does the other switch, really, which is it kills off the daughter, right? So then it becomes a film about the boy, really,
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a kind of an interesting thing there about the relationship between the mother and the boy, and it's not clear to what extent she's conscious of the link that she herself provides with the mother and with that world, because there's that whole thing about the miniatures and the dollhouse, and her obsessively kind of making scenes of her life in this dollhouse that actually has great similarities with what she sees in the house of her mother's best friend, with all the people bowing in front of the image of So
I think it's kind of trying to use details like that to convince you that there's kind of more of a plan behind the film than there is in a way. I think it's really trying to say like that there's this whole thing of this cult that is trying to bring back this demon of hell.
Yes.
And the demon of hell comes back through possessing vulnerable male bodies. I think it's unsatisfactory, because the only male in the film who has anything to do with it is the son. The only other male who's of any significance is the dad, and he doesn't have anything to do with this. Yes. So the film is like so. Despite the fact this demon is coming back through men, the film is all about women, yes. and it kind of doesn't add up.
Well, I mean, you're given some background. So she tells us that her father died before she was born. and then that her brother starved himself to death or something.
Yeah, it was
like
a
that.
schizophrenic. There's a point where she basically details a history of sort of different mental illnesses within her family.
Yeah. So and you get the feeling that maybe there's a history that is tied together in the sense that, you know, maybe this boy starved himself rather than giving up his body to the devil or whatever. But I don't know. I was trying to think, well, what is the film about? Yeah, you know, because one of the fascinating things about horror right now is that, you know, it offers more of a critical commentary on American culture than almost any other genre, right? And it's kind of like often very explicit in its condemnations. And so I was trying to think, well, you know, what is it about? So on the one hand, you could say, well, there is a kind of anti-capitalist theme because, you know, the whole thing about bringing back the devil is that the person who brings them back is endowed with riches.
Okay.
Right? So, you know, that could be like, you know, a strand of thought. It could also be kind of something about the family, right? But then would you think, well, but what is it saying about the family, right? And kind of...
Yes, I think it is... I struggle to... I don't want to be too declarative about it without, you know, kind of having had the opportunity to give it more thought, I suppose. But it does feel like it's not as clever as it thinks it is, or as clever as other people seem to think it is. Yeah. I think the fact that it is so slow, basically for a long time, which is not a criticism, but it is just it's not moving at a, you know, kind of breakneck speed.
No.
Slightly kind of lulls you into thinking that there's more significance or detail in what's going on. Actually, I think there are some really nice things about the pace of it. I really like the way the camera's used. I think there's a lot of composition in long takes and a moving camera that kind of frames and reframes, but doesn't cut for a long time. And I think that partially that's great because it shows care, and you feel it, and you can see the performances, and again you feel that. And I think ultimately what the film's doing there is earning your trust as a viewer. I think a horror film in particular is you're always kind of aware of the trickery that might be going on to fuck with you, and the fact that you're kind of being invited into these unbroken scenes. It sort of suggests a solidity of what you're seeing in a way that means that when cuts become more important. I don't know how else to phrase it. I like that there seemed to be care being taken over the way it was shot and put together.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that. So I agree with some aspects. I mean, I think kind of the long takes and what you said about that, I do see, and I thought it was very good, and it makes the cuts more effective, or, you know, it draws a different attention to them at key moments. But actually, I hated the whole look of the film.
Yeah.
Right. It had that thin kind of digital look, that looks cheap. It's almost like some things are like too clear, you know, kind of some things are too gray. There didn't seem to me to be a plan behind, you know, those shifts. I remember seeing a scene with the mother and the mother's best friend, the grandmother's best friend in the parking lot, right, where you have all of these shadows crossing her face, and you think, you know, they're completely inexpressive, those shadows. That's just where the light was happening to fall, and they haven't taken care to kind of make it mean something, right? Like, so I thought kind of it was badly shot, really, in many ways. I wish that they'd done more with the house visually. I wish that they'd done more with the attic visually. That
crossed my mind when the kid goes up to the attic at the end. The attic has been in the film once or twice, and then it becomes the sort of one of the places where the film climaxes. And when you're going up there, you're sort of thinking like this is supposed to be where kind of secrets are hidden.
Yeah,
you know, and revelations come out, and then on top of that, you've got the occult thing going on of like the kid is kind of a demon. So things should be sort of exploding expressively up there, and they're not.
No. And also, I'm kind of a bit bewildered. So for the first part of the movie, I thought, oh my God, you know, like, because I love Toni Collette, and she is wonderful. But then I also thought, oh, Gabriel Byrne, fantastic, right? It's so nice to see him. And then, you know, kind of you're waiting for something to happen with him, right? Because, you know, he's such a great actor. And so, kind of, if they have him in this film, it's because at some point they're going to give him something to do. Yeah, and they never do, right? It's a really dull role, kind of, with very few emotional registers.
He's just a walking frown.
Yeah,
just going no, the whole film.
So I thought that was a waste. To be fair, there was a moment which came to me unexpectedly where they're at the table and they're all grieving over the death of the daughter. That really moved me. That I found myself slightly welling up at.
Yep.
Right.
I agree with you.
Which was very surprising.
For me, it was when the mother, the son hasn't. They haven't spoken about it, and the son hasn't apologized. He's just kind of, sort of, tried to be quiet about it, and I mean, I kind of sympathise with him. Like, how do you bring that up?
Yes.
How do you say, I've killed your daughter? But of course, I also think that, like, you probably should say sorry. But it's when the mother stands up after the kid wants to bring this all out. Says, "What? There's something on your mind. Talk to me." And they start having it out. She stands up and she says, "It's not just a torrent of anger." She says, "I wish I could protect you from the knowledge of what you've done."
Yes.
So like there's a kind of forgiveness in there, or sympathising. She knows that she can't blame him exactly.
But then she blames him.
But of course she does. And he deserves some blame.
Well, I don't know. I mean, kind of, what I like about the film is that the way that it complicates everything.
Yes.
So you see that the boy really just wants to go on his own, right, to this teenage party. The last thing he wants is to bring his bloody sister, So it's cued early on that she's allergic to nuts. So, and then you see the sprinkling of the nuts. They go into the party. The mother forces him to take the sister to the party, and then whilst he's upstairs, she gobbles up the cake like nobody's business, and then you see kind of the nuts acting on her. So, then he races to kind of, get help for her.
Yeah.
And she puts out her head, outside.
And I agree, but he's also been smoking weed, knowing that he would have to drive. Because he's taken the car.
Yeah.
Knowing that he's responsible for his sister. You're right. It is complicated, but the point is that there is kind of blame that is shared. It's not all on him. It's not all on her. It's not all, and so.
Well, that's why the scene is so good.
Right.
Because his question is valid, and actually her So this thing that you're saying, well, I wish I could protect you from this, but then it continues a little bit. But it is your fault, yeah. So she loses it at the end, and then his answer, well, what about you, right? So I think kind of those complications are brought out in a way that are unexpected, in a genre film like this, and actually that are very effective. So actually, the film has moments like that. But then it pretty much lost me at other moments, and there was a feeling like halfway from the end where I was really thinking, I just want this to end.
Can you remember whenabouts?
The bit where she's going a bit bonkers with the book and she's losing it, and kind of she wants him to do this and that, and it's very hysterical. It starts to get
kind of adolescent, and I think what the film is trying to do is it's a family that is being kept together, but there are cracks all over the place. And I think the film is attempting to use the kind of paranormal and weird stuff that's going on to pull at these cracks, and to try and use them to expose the problems in the family, and the kind of secrets and things. And I don't think it's very successful at doing that, really. I think that actually the horror, sort of the more conventional horror stuff, feels very separate from the family drama, and the family drama is much more effective.
Yes, I think there are very muddled things. So, for example, when she says, she always kept away from her mother, like she wanted to have nothing to do with her mother, right? And then that she didn't want any children, and then that she tried to basically abort him in every way that she could think of without success. You think, well, does she know something or does she not know something? It's never made clear. So, why does she want to abort? And so she's presented to you as someone who actually doesn't have a clue about all of these things. And yet kind of there are these decisions that kind of have a resonance. And I think the film also cheats a little bit, because you get the feeling that, you know, they make her sleepwalk, and things happen when she's sleepwalking, you know, that she's not conscious of, you know, but actually the relationship between the sleepwalking maybe to the supernatural world, or, you know, kind of, those are not really kind of clearly understood.
They're not explained, or well, they're there. The sleepwalking is there to kind of provide a sort of mechanism by which sort of weird stuff can happen while she, you know, to generate ambiguity.
Yes.
You know, is she possessed, or is she sleepwalking, or does she know what she's doing? And the more ambiguous for the film's sake, the better. But actually, for the audience's sake, probably not so much, because it does end up being too confusing.
I thought it was muddled. So, you know, when she says that scene where she was sleepwalking and she wakes up and, like, you know, her children are covered in lighter fluid and she's got a lighter in her hand, or paint thinner, and she's got a lighter in her hand, kind of, you think, okay, well, you know, was it a bad dream, or actually does she know what she's doing? She wants to burn them up so that they don't bring the demon into the world. Actually, that seems to me like pretty fundamental in a horror film, to kind of, you know, make that distinction, right? Do you know? Do you not know? Do you know something? And even if, like, you know, a knowledge is only in sleep, but it's a real knowledge, then you can create a tension between the waking life and the, you know, the sleep life. But actually, the film does nothing with that.
I was going to say, because it's fairly clear that from what she kind of consciously knows, she has no knowledge of this ritual, this demon thing, because she learns about it, and through her learning about it, we learn about it.
Exactly.
And the revelation of Joan, who, you know, she's just kind of met accidentally, actually being an old friend of her mother's, who forces her way into her life to, you know, to kind of make this ritual happen, I think is the suggestion.
Yes.
There's something kind of fated about the family in a way. Like, I guess the thing with the son, although you're right that there does feel that there needs to be more of an explanation of quite why she was so determined not to have the kid. The fact that she tries everything not to have the kid, but the kid is coming anyway. Yeah. There's a kind of fate aspect. Like, this was determined before she had any idea, before the kids were even born.
Yes.
There was the kind of this ritual was supposed to be happening. This demon was coming back. But the film was raising laughs, and not just with me. I mean, there were more laughs than kind of gasps or jumps or anything like that around the audience.
There were very few
people
gasps
were finding
or jumps.
it very silly.
And actually, a few people walked out. So I wasn't very impressed, and I have to think through this misogynist thing, because I do think it's there, and I'm not I'm not sure that I have an argument that provides all kinds of evidence and wraps it up neatly, you know. But I didn't like it.
It's a really interesting thought, and no, you're right. I think there is something to it. It's a film in a way that feels like it doesn't really understand the kind of depth of its subject matter, and the fact that it ends up going into this fairly infantile nonsense, occult weirdness.
Yes.
It's like a film school project in a way. Like I remember my brother saying to me, and this might sound insulting to my brother, but I think it's a cool idea. Is he said, like, if you have just like a regular TV show like Mad Men or something, just like a decent drama, and then in like season 5, like War of the Worlds happens and aliens invade, and just see if people went with it, is a fun idea. But actually, in a film like this, you go, oh wait, now that I've seen someone do that, where like something genuinely goes that batshit insane, I realise it's a dumb idea, and it's only something that film students would be interested in doing.
I mean, there were some things that just didn't make sense. So, for example, there are actually relatively few men in the film, right? Like, the film is really female-centric through most of it, right? And then at the end, when, you know, the boy is turned into, like, the king of whatever, you know, one of the kings of...
King Paimon, I think his name was.
Then all of a sudden, you have all these naked men, you know, kind of bowing down to him. And you think, where did they come from? Because all you've seen is women. And actually, the women are all decapitated around this birth of this new evil king, you know. So most of the women are with their heads off. And then all these men appear. And you think, like, what's that about?
Well, I mean, you're right. But I think asking any kind of sort of real questions about that is foolish. I think by the end of the film, by those last few minutes, the kind of the verifiability of anything that you've seen before is really in question.
Yes. Well, but I think if you're trying to see kind of themes unfurl, whatever, you want to make sense of these things, and actually they don't. Yeah.
Which I thought you meant just like in practical terms, where do they come from?
Well, no, I meant...
It's sort of thematic terms, I guess.
Well, I think in my own head, if I'm trying to say, like, there's a misogynist edge to this film, right? Because all these women have plotted to kind of bring this evil into the world, right? And then actually evil takes male form. And all of a sudden, kind of, there are, all these naked men who are now the power mongers, really, because all the women are there with their heads cut off. Yeah. Right? Yeah, so I'm just trying to kind of
I agree.
Make sense of that.
Definitely something with it reminds me the point you're making reminds me of a film I watched called It Follows, which is from 2014, I think. It's a horror movie about again it has some interesting sort of careful filmmaking aspects to it. It's about this sort of entity that follows people. When you have sex with someone else, it kind of gets transmitted, and then it basically follows you and kills you, and then goes back to kill the last person you had sex. So it's a joke on STDs, not a joke, but like a whatever analogy. But again, like as interesting as that film was in some ways, from the first minute, it was incredibly misogynistic because it's a film that really luxuriates in looking at women's dead bodies being sort of arranged.
Yes.
Weird. And no one, I was reading reviews of it, and no one seemed to say anything like that. It's really weird how it kind of gets past people.
For a moment, I thought that the boy was going to be like the female equivalent of the last girl. It'll be like the last boy, right? And then of course, instead of it being like that, he's hailed as the new king and crowned, and
it's kind of a happy ending.
So it's just bizarre. There are analogies to all of the famous horror films. I mean, you could really see the connection to like Rosemary's Baby. I think very clearly, and there's aspects of The Exorcist and so on. But my God, actually, even The Exorcist, which I hate. Like when you think of some of those images and the glossy luxuriance of them, I find that kind of this film on a visual level, it's just like nothing.
What do you hate about The Exorcist?
Well, pretty much everything, really. I hate the fact that it kind of it has the religious kind of dimension. I hate what they do to Linda Blair in it. I think it's kind of like gruesome and gory and.
Well, go on. I mean, I'm interested. Like, what about Linda Blair and what about the religious aspect? If you can remember.
Yeah, I think getting a 13-year-old girl to put a crucifix up her vagina is completely disgusting and inexcusable. So I'll leave it at that. And
there does seem to be this feeling of like that. Not necessarily with little girls even, but just like torturing your actors means that you're a good director, which is bullshit.
But I think in this case, I mean, I forget what Linda Blair's real age was, but it was something like that, wasn't it? Like 13 or 14 in the film.
I can find out.
Yeah, find out. I just think that's kind of disgusting.
Linda Blair. She was born in 59, and The Exorcist came out in 73. So she 13 or 14 when it was being filmed.
Yes. And if you imagine that it was probably filmed the year before it was released,
And what about the religious aspect?
Well, it buys into them, doesn't it? Is
that a problem?
Well, for me it is.
Is it a problem that a film treats religion as something that is actually real?
For me it is.
Okay.
So obviously that would get rid of a lot of supernatural kind of things. And it is a fantasy and it is a game and so on. But it's not just, this thing is not just that, I suppose, well, I'm not even supportive of religion in the abstract, actually. I do think it is the opium of the people in every form. But that the film was so Catholic in its treatment of the supernatural, right? And the very idea of exorcism kind of only, plays out within kind of a particular view of good and evil and the role of the church in it, and and that actually supports all of that just by virtue of how it plays out in the film. I didn't like that.
Fair.
I mean, I'm speaking. I haven't seen it for
absolutely.
30 years.
I was just curious to get you reading it. I mean, it's not a film that I saw it for the first time. I saw it for the first time actually at Warwick Film Sock. So I would have been 19 or 20. And I was kind of nonplussed by it, I suppose. It's not something that struck me or really involved me or was scary to me. But...
frankly, my understanding, and I could be wrong, and maybe one should look it up, but my impression was always that nobody ever really thought it was a good movie. I mean, obviously, it was an enormous success. It was like a Jaws type of success before Jaws.
Yeah.
Right. But its reputation as a masterpiece of the cinema is really only due to Mark Kermode. I mean, he went on a rampage about it being his famous film, and then he wrote the BFI classic, and then I think a younger generation of people just assumes that it is a classic because there's a classic book on it, and Mark Kermode loves it. But I don't think anybody who's really serious about the art of cinema has ever thought that that's a great movie.
Well, I can give you, this is just a scanning of the reception sort of section on Wikipedia, so
sure,
take it as you will. But there are reviews from Stanley Kaufman in the New Republic, Variety, Roger Ebert gave it 4 out of 4 stars. So some people seem to like it, and then there are also a number of less positive ones. And it does say, to be fair, The Exorcist critical reputation has grown considerably over the years, that's pretty unquestionable, I suppose.
Yes, well, and I'm just giving you my view of how that developed, basically. Because
but that's The Exorcist.
Yeah. Let's get back on topic and wrap it up, really.
Hereditary, What do you think of the title?
See, that doesn't make sense to me either.
By the time we got to the end, I thought maybe it's about like the horror of Hereditary succession.
No, I think this is something that a television series, any old television series dealing with witches or the supernatural, would have done it much more elegantly. You could have had a preamble about generations of witches that bring back this god or whatever, and make it all make sense. But actually, you have no idea, right? So all you know is there's a grandmother, and presumably, she kind of worshipped the devil or whatever. But in what sense are these, powers hereditary, or who inherits them, and you're none the wiser, and actually to the film's detriment.
It is, because the real problem about that is what the film does early on is set up a mystery.
Yes,
and then it has no. Maybe it's not fair to say it has no interest in explaining it. I think there's a good chance that actually, if you were to ask the writer director, what's going on, he would be able to tell you. Well, if you look at this clue here and this clue here, do you know what I mean? Like the kind of thing where it's all been hidden away. But that's not fair to an audience.
I think there's definitely a sense of that because, for example, one of the things that you're very conscious throughout the film from the very beginning is the role of those dollhouses, right? Because, the film kind of starts on a dollhouse and then kind of it moves to a bedroom and you wonder, is the bedroom in the dollhouse? Or there's continued references back to this dollhouse, right? But I still don't get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that it means something. That kind of you're drawn to it all the time, that is kind of referenced over and over again.
And then they end up being smashed.
Yeah, and then they end up being smashed.
Going, okay, so what does that mean?
What does it mean? It just kind of, that in the director and the writer's minds it means something, but actually I just didn't get it.
Yeah, and I don't like that feeling of a film sort of speaking in code.
Yes.
I just don't think that's very good storytelling.
Yes.
I mean, I was watching a Vanity Fair video, or some publication like that. They do videos on YouTube, and it was Jordan Peele who wrote and directed Get Out, which we both agree is a really good film, and everyone agrees that. They gave him sort of fan theories about what kind of details of the film or what was happening in the film. And he responded in a way that I found quite disappointing, which was to say, oh yeah, that's kind of right. Oh no, that's not really right. Whereas what really the response should be, oh, that's interesting.
Yes.
You know, oh, that's not what I was going for, but that's a really interesting interpretation.
Yes.
You know, I don't like the idea that there is a coded way, because then you're not interpreting a film, you're looking for clues.
Yes.
And that's what I feel this film is.
Yes. Oh, that's interesting.
Do you know what I mean?
Even because, so let me backtrack, because actually I don't mind if films are coded, right? Because, you know, so for example, I've been watching like a lot of Antonioni, and really the films are all very coded. But the thing is that, you know, it gives you this patterning from the very beginning of the film,
yeah,
so that you can make sense of, you know, whatever code it's working through, right? So I'm quite open to kind of films working in various ways. But I just think that this one is sloppy, that there is something that, you know, the filmmakers have tried to communicate to an audience that it somehow fails at.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we didn't get it.
Well, yeah, or we kind of partially got it, but felt that it was so sort of silly and wild and vague that there was actually no sort of purpose or profit in actually pursuing it.
Yes.
That's
I mean, you know, so for example, there was this other thing where, you know, when the boy's looking out the window, you know, and you know that it's something important because there's that red light, you know, which looks like it might be from the tree house, right? And it's being reflected in his eyes and so on. So you think, oh, you know, there's something, you know, what's the light? What does it mean? Where's it coming from? What effect is it going to have, right? And actually, I still can't connect the pieces. You know,
it's just there to make him look a little bit evil. I don't know. Like, I also noticed the couple of scenes you get in the classroom. It's the sort of thing when someone's talking in a classroom or when someone's watching something on TV in a movie, like you should notice what they're talking about or what they're watching, because it's not just an accent, you know. Like how in what was the Lynn Ramsey movie we saw a few months ago?
Ratcatcher.
No, a few months.
The one with Joaquin Phoenix. Yes.
You Were Never Really Here.
You Were Never Really Here. That was fabulous.
In You Were Never Really Here, there's a scene which we didn't pick up on at the time. We didn't talk about it at least, where he sat with a girl on the bed in the hotel room, and they're watching the Shawshank Redemption on TV. You can't see it, you can just hear it, but it's when Andy and Red are talking about Zihuatanejo and escaping, and it's like that's a perfect echo of what is driving these characters at the time, you know, what they want and the kind of freedom they're hoping to gain and this sort of thing. So when it's done well, it's not an accident, you know.
Yes.
But in this film, the teacher's talking about Hercules, and it's a kind of extended scene. Like they're chatting away in the class, and he says, you know, what was Hercules' downfall? And someone says arrogance. You know, he believed this, that, and the other. And you're going, okay, so I'm looking for that in the rest of the film. Like, where's people going to be talking about being too arrogant? I don't really see that. Later on, there's something about Iphigenia, and again, there was something about fate, maybe a little bit. The idea that Hercules was fated and had no choice, and does that make his story more tragic or less tragic? But it's really light. And like I guess I kind of feel like I want more, but I also want to know really what the writer thought was going on.
There was also another classroom discussion on the Great Depression, you know, and so again, kind of I was, you know, because I think you can tie those things in a way, right? So the God enriches these people. Yeah, and there is a discussion on the Great Depression, and, you know, we are just going through this enormous recession since 2008. But, you know, so you're trying to say, yeah, there seem to be connections. Yeah. But I'm just
everything
not
stops
able
kind of
to...
quite soon.
Yeah.
It's just really, really unsatisfactory to kind of think about all those details. Because it seems so clear that the film wants you to.
Yes.
You go, okay, well, I tried.
Yes. Well, let's move track now, because I think, you know, I don't want to end the podcast without just praising Toni Collette.
Yes.
Yeah. Because one of the things, you know, after her first couple of scenes, I was just thinking, you know, I don't understand why writers and directors aren't kind of, you know, falling over themselves trying to write stuff for this woman, you know, because she's not only like a brilliant actress, but she's a real star. She's so charismatic. You can't stop looking at her, you know. And so kind of, you know, and yet you think, what use has been made of her in films, you know? And the last thing I can really vividly remember her in is the Hugh Grant thing where she plays the mother. A man.
Oh, About a Boy.
About a Boy.
That's 2002. Yeah. I was going to say, although you're right, she's very good in that, and I'd forgotten it. I was going to say the last thing I can remember in was Sixth Sense, where she plays a somewhat similar role to this, basically, scared mother of a creepy kid.
Yes, but that's earlier.
Which is 1999.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of, part of the problem with cinema is that they're not doing this kind of, and to the film's credit, this is
it makes
a
really
role.
good use of her.
Yeah.
I mean, she's fantastic. She has a lot to do, and I think that what we were talking about earlier, the long takes, they suit her so well, and they make her performance even greater.
Yes. I think to me that is the completely uncontroversial success of the film, the inarguable success of the film, that it provides her with a role in which she can be truly great, and really kind of quite touching in a very complex role. I mean, a woman who kind of dreams of setting her children on fire, who tried every way to abort them. If you think about the role, just in terms of those characteristics, kind of, it's quite a difficult and scary and daunting one. Yeah, and I think she just does marvels.
There's nothing unconvincing about it, is there? As you say, when you consider what's going into the character. Yeah. That is kind of amazing, isn't it?
So I would say I found the film very unsatisfactory, and its saving grace is really, kind of. There's some really interesting staging and direction, I will acknowledge, as you say. And then also Toni Collette's performance, which is absolutely great and kind of exceeds whatever the film does.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Okay, well, righto. Thank you very much for listening.
There you go. As I said, I think on a previous podcast, like, people have been waiting to talk about this film, which I thought was interesting. I've seen people going, will people hurry up and see Hereditary so we can talk about it?
Ah, right, okay.
And I think that's interesting because some people are responding, because it's not, doesn't necessarily mean that people think it's good, although that's probably an indicator. People want to talk about things they like, but people definitely think it's interesting.
Well, I think it is interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think we've just had a very interesting conversation, and I think, I think also I want to offer this as a cue for people to kind of get in touch and give their interpretations, because, maybe the things that we haven't seen, that kind of, that we can't quite connect, maybe other people do, can connect them. But certainly, it's a film that does make you think about all of those things, which in itself is something that's very interesting, yeah?
I think there's probably a dimension that we're both missing. I certainly am, which is that, as I said earlier on, I just don't really get on with occult-type stories.
Yes.
Which is not to say that I went to the film with kind of low... I mean, for one thing, I didn't know that's what it was going to be. But when I'm faced with something like Kill List or The Wicker Man... I do end up kind of nonplussed, despite the fact these films have a real reputation of greatness.
Yes.
And I wonder if that means that then there's just a lack of understanding of why people are interested in the occult, or what it means, or why people are interested in it. Well, it's something that's totally lacking from me and from my interpretation of this film.
That could be true of me as well. It certainly
I want to ask Matt Denny about it, because he's interested in all British horror and that sort of thing.
Yes, and but British horror is not very supernatural, is it?
Well, like I say, it gets quite occulty. Like I say, kind of the druidy stuff, the Wicker Man.
Yeah, occult druidy stuff. Yes, I suppose.
I think he probably have a lot more to say about it. But I think in that respect, I think he probably have a lot more to say about it than I could.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to get his read on it. Which, and you should follow Matt Denny on Twitter, as you should follow us. We are at Eavesdrop Movies. We're eavesdropping at the movies on Facebook and SoundCloud and iTunes.
Yes.
And
do get in touch, or do kind of comment if either you can extrapolate some of these interpretations and make them neater and make more sense of them than we have, or indeed if you have new ones. I mean, I think that the film is successful in that it makes you try to bring that kind of coherence to a set of themes and ideas that it kind of lays out, and that we're arguing that it doesn't kind of develop very coherently. But you might find a coherence that we are presently missing, and if so, we'd really love to hear from you.
Yes, wouldn't we just?
All right, well, goodbye.
Bye.